I think it lit a little bit of a fire under Alabama. And what you've seen is Alabama has responded by saying, hey, look, if we want to care about a program, we can do it better than you can. And they did it pretty quickly. I mean, once Oats got in here, the speed with which he turned this program into a national contender is really impressive.
Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and joining me this week, as he often does, is Beat Everyone producer, our good friend, Matt Scalici. How's it going, Matt?
Not too bad, Ben. Made it through the winter storm.
Yeah, we did. Did you get snow?
Yeah, we got some snow in Birmingham, like the appropriate amount. Like you get to enjoy it. Didn't cause mass chaos and panic the way that it sometimes can in Alabama.
Yeah, my thought about snow is that it's fun for about 45 minutes in Alabama. And for 45 minutes, you're making snowmen, you're having snowball fights, but then it starts to get like ugly and muddy. It's still cold. It won't go away. And then it's like, oh, I can't drive right now, can I? And
it's really a good, symbolically, it's like the Big Ten imposing their will upon the South. It's not supposed to be like that here.
I think it's great. Like, one great thing about living in Alabama when you have snow is that like you truly experience the four seasons in 24 hours. And
right.
The next day there is no proof of snow anywhere. And like Tuscaloosa was like, there's nothing to see here. No snow here. It's all been swept under the rug.
I'm in a t-shirt today, Ben, for people who are audio only watching the show. And it's comfortable outside.
There was no evidence of a winter storm less than 24 hours later in Tuscaloosa.
My yard doesn't even look that bad, honestly.
No. But it is basketball season, Matt. I mean, Alabama is a basketball school after all. Everybody says that. Everybody knows that. And it's what we were all waiting for during football season, and now we're finally here. But we'll get to that. Matt, there are a few more than 60 players, I think that number is right, on NFL rosters that went to Alabama. 10 former Alabama players were included among the 88 All-Stars selected for the upcoming Pro Bowl games, or whatever that has become in recent years. And Alabama had 38 players on NFL playoff teams going into this postseason. I mean, Alabama dominates the NFL, Matt. So if you never cared to watch the NFL before the Nick Saban era, you've got plenty of reason to now. When we kind of want to dig into Alabama in the NFL, especially during the playoffs, we're a week into it now, we're past the wild card round at this point, and the divisional round is coming up, and still a lot of Alabama players on these rosters, guys you'll probably see playing on Super Bowl Sunday. But Matt, I just wanted to start. What is your typical interest level in the NFL, and how much does your interest in Alabama football and its former players play a role in any NFL that you might watch?
I have not watched a ton of NFL actually over my years covering Alabama, in part just this is going to bore our listeners, I'm sure. The realities of the job when you are a beat writer are that you are working not just a normal day on a Saturday in the fall, but you're really working like a double of a normal day, and you got to see your wife and kids at some point. So I honestly didn't watch a ton of sports on Sundays, but I was aware of it certainly. And it's a huge part of the identity of the program, especially in the Saban era. You walk through the Alabama football facility, NFL stuff is on every wall. They're constantly reminding you what a big part of the program the NFL is, because it's the ultimate, desired destiny of the guys who go to play there. So I think it's be safe to say I watch the playoffs. I keep up with the careers of a lot of Alabama players who go to the NFL. I'm not like a fantasy football guy. I'm not watching every snap of every game.
I hate fantasy football, and personally, as a player, I've played it before and it can be a lot of fun. What I can say is I don't care about your fantasy football team, but luck to you. Good luck to you. Yeah. I hope you win. And I hope you don't have to spend 24 hours in Waffle House or whatever the punishment is for losing, even though there are worse punishments, to say the least. What's funny about the NFL in Alabama? I mean, growing up, it used to be non-existent, or at least I grew up in Tuscaloosa, and so our family, we subscribed to the Tuscaloosa News, and every Monday or Tuesday morning, whatever it was, I'd wake up, I'd open the sports page, and inside it there would be this update with like 7 or 8 names where it was like, this is how this guy did in the NFL this past weekend, and it was just like, it was like the saddest list, like towards the end of like that run, it would be like Chris Samuels played the entire game. Sean Alexander had this many carries and this many yards against, the whatever Cardinals or whatever it was. And that would be like the 2 guys that you'd keep an eye on. But otherwise, I mean, I didn't watch a ton of NFL. I was way more focused on college. And it would be like maybe watching a game and like the Steelers were playing and my dad goes, hey, Deshae Townsend played for Alabama. And it's like, what, really? I didn't know any Alabama players were in the league. Or like, Dwayne Rudd played for Alabama. Oh, wow, I can't believe it. Yeah, so-and-so is a backup, and he'll never play, but he played at Alabama, and now it's completely different.
Yeah, it's like a full-time job for people that work at AL.com, Ben. You got like Mark and Abbott and Craig Stevenson are constantly cranking out stories about guys that used to play at Alabama and are now in the NFL, and it's almost too much for multiple guys to keep up with.
Yeah, it's like a beat at this point, right? To follow Alabama and Auburn, for that matter, wherever they're from, Alabama in the NFL. And I mean, it keeps you busy. I mean, just if you go to like AL.com/NFL, you'll just see story after story after story updates from the wild card round of the playoffs. So it wasn't even like a regular season weekend where pretty much everybody is playing. It's a select number of teams that are playing, but you've got some teams like the Houston Texans and the Detroit Lions that have at least 6 Alabama players on the 53-man roster. And so it's a different time, to say the least, from the 90s and even the 2000s when, Alabama fans would just be like thrilled to death that an Alabama player made the practice squad, let alone multiple guys are leading the league in their various categories, which is the case now, and guys that could be instrumental parts of Super Bowl runs, right? I mean, it was just a couple of years ago that Jalen Hurts is the starting quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles and is this close, is a penalty away from competing to win a Super Bowl as the starting quarterback. It's like, wow, like if you had told me that 15 or I guess however many years ago, before the Nick Saban era, because it's been a while now at this point, part of 2 decades, I just simply wouldn't have believed you, even though there had been obviously so much Alabama football history that had, made its way into the pros throughout the years. Alabama was just, they had just hit a dry patch, to say the least. So look, I watch it. I watch it a lot. I keep an eye on it, for work, certainly, but because I like to watch the NFL. I like to watch good football, right? And you get to see these guys and tune in every week. And, regionally they try to show you games. If you don't have like something like the Sunday Ticket or whatever, they'll try to show you games that like Alabama fans might have an interest in. So you might see like the Carolina Panthers on, or you might have seen like the Atlanta Falcons on back when Julio Jones was playing. And so it's just super cool because it doesn't really matter, because it's like, yeah, you'll get the regional game and it's fun to watch that. But at the same time, Sunday night football, Thursday night football, Monday night football, there's going to be a bunch of Alabama players on the screen.
And I think for casual fans of the NFL who are mostly Alabama fans, one of the parts of the last couple of years that's been so much fun is because the NFL is such a quarterback driven league, and that's who's in the spotlight in every single game. Now Alabama has really started to become more prominent in these games between, obviously, as you mentioned, Jalen Hurts, but Tua leading Miami to some decent success. They didn't make the playoffs this year, but a pretty good season for the most part for them. Mac Jones has moved around a little bit and actually played a decent amount this year in Jacksonville because of injuries. And really the one that's been a surprise this season for a lot of people is Bryce Young, who a lot of guys had written off, and it didn't look like his career was gonna end up being a happy story in terms of the NFL portion of it. Suddenly, the guy flipped a switch and is now one of the best stories in the NFL this season, and everybody's hugely optimistic about him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, watching him down the stretch of the year, people were saying he's got a case for being the comeback player of the year just within the season. The comeback he made within the season, guy got benched And then he comes back in and just looks like a completely different player. And shout out to Bryce Young for showing some perseverance and getting out there and looking like, a franchise quarterback. And they seem like the sea has obviously changed, where it looked like they were looking for trade opportunities for him. And now he looks like the guy in Carolina. So that's really cool. I mean, that kind of leads me to my next question for you, Matt, though. Like, who is your one favorite player to watch in the NFL? Like, we'll go through the list of all these guys who are, so great, entertaining, and are the best in the league in various categories, like I said. But like, if you could watch one guy Sunday to Sunday, who would it be?
I mean, it's a guy that I would arguably say is maybe my favorite player at Alabama to have watched during their career too. But right now, and for the last several years, it's Derrick Henry for me. It's not a league that has a ton of high wattage superstar running backs anymore. There are a lot of running backs that have maybe a standout season. I mean, Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia is having one of those right now too. But like, it doesn't seem like a career like that has a ton of longevity. It doesn't seem like a guy who is burning really bright as a running back hangs around for a super long time. And at this point, Derrick Henry has had quite a long career for a running back in the NFL, and he doesn't really seem like he's nearing the end of his time as a dominant player. In fact, he almost seems impossible to stop right now for Baltimore. And it's so cool to watch. I'll tell you what's fun for me is watching the rest of the country enjoy Derrick Henry in a way that they couldn't when he was at Alabama, because everybody nationally, Alabama is the black hat. Everybody wants to see them lose in the big games. And now that he's in the NFL and he's in a playoff contending team, when they see Derrick Henry go off like that and stiff-arming guys and going on these incredible long runs where he seems to get faster the longer the run goes, everybody loves it, and everybody celebrates him. And it is sort of gratifying to watch as an Alabama fan.
Yeah, I think Derrick Henry is going to be the answer for a lot of people, and for good reason. I mean, the guy was 79 or so yards away from another 2,000-yard season this many years into his career. Unbelievable. I'm reading all of these stories and season previews where so many people say that Derrick Henry's going to have a drop-off this year. It's just going to happen. It's the way the position, like, it's just the trajectory of the position, right? And he has just defied the odds as one of the great running backs, not only in the league, but at this point of all time. I mean, he's up there with names like Emmitt Smith and Walter Payton and Adrian Peterson and Barry Sanders. I mean, it's truly unbelievable to watch.
The phrase "built different" has never applied to anyone better than Derrick Henry. Well, I mean, from the beginning of his time, you go back and look at his high school career, like, put up numbers that are not comparable for anybody else as a high school football player, and then really didn't see the field a ton at Alabama before 2015, and was just, I mean, I believe he still owns the SEC record for career or for rushing yards in a season. And it seems kind of unbreakable, this record. I don't know. Now we're heading into a extended playoff era, so who knows? But just a guy that is there are not very many people you could compare to him physically and what he's able to do at that position.
Yeah, and I know that, like, what you see at Alabama for many years doesn't always translate in, like, what anybody watches from their favorite college players. It doesn't always translate because it's like a level playing field. Everybody is great in the NFL, and you really have to earn your stripes, so to speak. But for years, just watching Derrick Henry play for the Tennessee Titans and obviously now for the Baltimore Ravens, I'm like screaming at my TV, give that man the ball. Give him the ball. Good things will happen.
And I remember I was like literally Sugar Bowl flashbacks.
Oh, dude, yes. And I was like, I was watching the Ravens Steelers game the other day, and the Steelers had such a lead. And I'm sure, the Ravens had such a lead, and I'm sure like a million people were saying this too. But I look at my wife and I just said, there's going to be a heavy dose of Derrick Henry here in the fourth quarter because they've got this lead and they're just going to milk the clock. I guarantee you this guy busts off a 50-yard touchdown run because they're just going to get sick of tackling the guy. And that's what we saw at Alabama all the time. At some point during the fourth quarter, Derrick Henry was going to hit you with like around the edge, like a 40 to 50-yard touchdown just to ice the game. Sure enough, a few plays later, the dude runs for a 44-yard touchdown and just kills the Steelers dead. And their season is over because this juggernaut of a human being, just this running back death machine, cannot be stopped. Derrick Henry, and poor Minka Fitzpatrick had to suffer the stiff arm curse of Derrick Henry. I love how Derrick Henry said like something like, "That's my brother. It's all love, but when it's on the field, it's all business." Never has that been more true from a person's mouth than it is Derrick Henry playing for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, just I mean, it's just I honestly, as you said, sometimes we wonder how much of it is our Bama blinders to how much we love these individual players. But I think this one's going down in history as pretty vindicated. I think the Heisman committee probably feels really good about their 2015 decision. I think Bama fans can rest assured that this guy's going to end up going down as not only one of the great college running backs of all time. I mean, he's possibly looking at an NFL Hall of Fame career here at this point.
He's a Hall of Famer. I think most people would say that now, but I mean, you add a Super Bowl to it. If they win it this year and the Ravens are positioned to do that, they're built to win. Then yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. But Matt, I want to share some stats from an account online. It's called, I think, Deeg or Deege Sports. But you see this every so often as the NFL season is going, like the Alabama stats. There are people out there that'll share them. But it says about 1 in every 6 touchdowns scored by a running back in the NFL this season was scored by an Alabama alumnus. Alabama running backs scored 61 rushing touchdowns out of 379 in the NFL, which is just unbelievable. And then another stat, it says NFL running back rushing yards by college during the 2024 season. Number 1 is Alabama, and it's 6,536 yards. Number 2 is Georgia with 2,655. So it's just,
Lord.
And it's not just Derrick Henry, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other guys on this list, and there have been for the last many years where, Alabama has become that RBU, right? Where these great running backs come from the program. And, we'll see if that continues. But I mean, I was going to mention some of these other players, Matt, that we love to watch play. In one of the, flavors of the year, so to speak, is another Super Bowl contender, Detroit Lions. And what we're seeing from guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams, I mean, they are must-see TV. It's probably the best offense in the NFL this year that can score on anybody, and it's because guys like that can score whenever they touch the ball. I mean, like, I know that's true for literally everybody, but seriously, they are a game-breaking threat anytime you can put the ball in their hands. And Jahmyr Gibbs, what the funniest thing to me, Matt, like if you're watching the NFL, anytime Jahmyr Gibbs has a good game, it's very likely that Bill O'Brien starts trending on Twitter because all these angry Alabama fans just feeling like he squandered Jahmyr Gibbs' potential. I truly believe Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the best football players that ever came through Alabama, and we barely saw what the guy could do. And now we see in the NFL, this guy is a superstar.
Yeah, and the Lions there with kind of like a best of 2020s for Alabama football so far. That just two of the most dynamic playmakers that Alabama's had, and obviously we see Bryce Young doing really well, as we mentioned right now. Devontae Smith is a big part of the offense for Philadelphia, a very solid receiving option for them, if not the main star for them. It's I think so far, as we're halfway through this decade, a lot of Alabama fans feel like it's been a long wait since they've gotten that last title in 2020, but it's still been a very productive decade so far in terms of elite players coming through the program. And for various other reasons, some of these guys I think still have good careers ahead of them, and we've really only started to see them scratch the surface. I'm thinking of Mechie too, who has had, for various reasons, had a little bit of a slow start to his career, and hopefully we're going to see a lot more from him down the road. But Josh Jacobs is a guy we didn't really mention yet, who is already eliminated from the playoffs as we're recording this, but had a great game and had a great season too for the Packers.
Yeah, he's awesome. Josh Jacobs, like people will never believe you if you tell them that guy never started at running back
Yeah.
when he played for Alabama. Like in some cases, he was the third option on the team, which looking back is just asinine. The guy was just unbelievable. The guy could carry the ball 30, 40 times a game if you asked him to. Just a bowling ball, amazing football player. I mean, can catch it out of the backfield, do everything. I big fan of Josh Jacobs. Love that he's on the Packers. Packers are a team I like to watch in the NFL. I've always enjoyed watching them. There's obviously a lot of history with Alabama. You mentioned there's Xavier McKinney. He had a great year at safety on the Packers, a lot of interceptions. But there's another team that, like I mentioned before, you talked about the Lions. There are a lot of Alabama players there. Houston, Texans,
Yeah.
ton of players. And who coaches them? A former Alabama player. He's one of those guys who had a great NFL career. He was one of the on the short list of Alabama football players whose stats you could check on Sunday or Monday or whenever they had played. D'Amico Ryans is just somebody that's beloved. I remember when D'Amico Ryans played at Alabama, he was a superstar.
People in an era where there weren't a lot of those for Alabama. Yeah.
People loved D'Amico Ryans. And watching the Texans has been a lot of fun because the emergence of, unsurprisingly, Will Anderson at the outside linebacker position. Guy had a monster game against the Chargers the other day, and he's obviously already one of the best players in the NFL. But you got like John Mechie, Henry To'oTo'o. You've got Christian Harris playing on that team. I'm probably leaving a couple out at this point, but the Texans are loaded with Alabama players. I had mentioned Bryce Young. You mentioned Josh Jacobs. Miami Dolphins are another team I love to watch. I mean, Tua is just, obviously a special player in Alabama history. But honestly, I think in a lot of ways, Tua made a case for himself at MVP this year because whenever the guy didn't play, they lost.
Right.
And whenever they played, they were competitive.
Two
and they
totally
were
different teams. Yeah.
Yeah, likely a playoff team. I'm not serious that he should have won MVP or anything like that, but he obviously makes that kind of impact when he plays. The team plays better, and they're probably a playoff team. They had a lot of problems this year. Probably first and foremost the injuries that Tua suffered. But man, you just hope the guy can stay healthy because he is so dynamic. And when he has weapons like Tyreek Hill and obviously one of my all-time favorite players at Alabama, Jalen Waddle, out there on the field healthy, when they're clicking on all cylinders, there's no better football to watch, in my opinion, week to week. So developed great chemistry. And Tua, I think and hope the guy's going to have a long career in the NFL. But yeah, the Miami Dolphins, fantastic team to watch on Sundays. And just going through some of the other teams, obviously the Baltimore Ravens have a lot of guys. And, you mentioned too, Devontae Smith, but, Jalen Hurts, again, I talked about that Super Bowl where he squared off against Patrick Mahomes and he put Philadelphia in a position to win that game, to win a Super Bowl. And can you imagine the cap that would have put on a storybook career that Jalen Hurts has had, from Alabama to Oklahoma to the NFL? Been counted out in a lot of cases, whether he was in Tuscaloosa or even in the NFL at this point. He's not the long-term solution. He's not the guy. Guy comes in there, gives him a chance to win, suffers a tough loss against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But then he signs like shortly after the biggest contract in NFL history. After that, that was pretty cool to watch with Jalen Hurts. But it's not just him either. You mentioned Devontae Smith, but you got Landon Dickerson's on that team.
Right.
Eli Ricks, Tyler Steen, Byron Young, guys that a lot of people forget, but Philadelphia's loaded and they're built for a long postseason run.
Yeah, and a quick shout out to another guy who's on a team that's maybe going on a surprising little postseason run is Brian Robinson, who's playing for the Washington Commanders, who I think a lot of people probably didn't have super high expectations for, but that franchise has turned itself around really quickly. And Brian Robinson's been, I don't know that he's having the same type of season as, a Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry, but an important part of their offense and has been a kind of a consistent, especially short yardage guy for them as a running back.
Yeah, Brian Robinson having a really strong NFL career. Obviously, that was off to a rocky start when he suffered a nearly tragic injury going into his rookie season. But he's been great. But also on that team, I mean, they just got a big win against Tampa Bay. Jonathan Allen, he tore a pectoral muscle this year. It looked like his season was over, and he came back and played in the postseason. He played in that game. And Daron Payne, obviously, he got nicked up a little bit in that game, but they're everywhere, Matt. Alabama players are everywhere, and they were in this postseason. And even when they're not on teams that, or when they're on teams that fail to make the postseason, they just give you a reason to watch the games. And, I think a lot of Alabama fans, are kind of cynical in that they don't love the NFL the way that they love college football. And they feel like their hearts are with college football. And I totally understand that. And they may be singing a different tune here in the era that we're in, right? The NIL era, the transfer portal era. People are becoming a little bit more cynical when it comes to sports, especially college right now. But it's kind of dead even at this point, I think, for some people, where it's like, players are getting paid regardless. It's sports. If you love sports, you're going to watch it. If you love Alabama, you got good reason to watch either, your favorite team or these NFL teams. So I'm just excited, man, because there's a lot of NFL. We know what kind of importance, networks place on it. And it's the most important sport, certainly in America at this point. And it's just good that Alabama has a place in all of it.
Yeah, and I think for a fan, for a sports fan, it's cool to have a rooting interest in the Super Bowl. And look, we always talk about how in the state of Alabama, the part of the reason people care so much about college football here is because we don't have an NFL team and don't have a rooting interest in those games. Well, I think that's changed for a lot of Alabama fans, and I think there are teams that you do find yourself rooting for, and you could frankly watch any random game and see somebody you recognize from their Alabama days and say, all right, well, now I know who I'm rooting for in this game now. And look, highly, highly likely that this Super Bowl will have some players in it that you care about if you're an Alabama fan, which is a cool thing.
I think there was, what are there, one or two teams? I think there might be two teams that don't have Alabama players on them in these playoffs. If I'm not mistaken, they would be the Los Angeles Rams and the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's a potential Super Bowl matchup at this point, Matt, as we're talking. So that would be highly unfortunate if those two teams made.
Well, I think we'd all be rooting against the Chiefs regardless. They are to the NFL now what Alabama has been for a lot of people to college football. Just who wants to see them win again?
No, I know. There have been more hateable dynasties in my mind, Matt. I don't mind them so much because look, Garrick Dieter is in the Taylor Swift box sometimes. I think we got to look for him this year. Good friend of Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. Apologies to Drew Champlin. I know our friend, a big Chiefs fan.
All right, Matt. It's basketball season, as I mentioned at the top of the show, and Alabama's got themselves a good basketball team. And as of right now, as we're talking this week, Alabama is ranked number 4 in the Associated Press Top 25 poll. Won't mention who's number 1, but Alabama's number 4. Alabama's number 4. And look, I mean, Nate Oats, ever since he got to Tuscaloosa, he's been a difference maker. He was obviously a great hire. And he's a great basketball coach. Guy's obsessed with the game, and he has really changed the culture at Alabama in ways that I think some Alabama fans never would have dreamed of. Obviously, the Final Four run last year, there were fans who probably never thought they would live to see that day. I mean, he's been to multiple Sweet 16s. It's just been awesome to watch, and he's just kind of created a similar culture to Nick Saban, if not quite the same impact or as high a volume. It's harder to do it with college basketball, to say the least, especially at a place like Alabama. But I mean, similarly, if you go to an Alabama basketball game at this point, they stop, during a timeout to say, here's Alabama in the NBA. And they show highlights of Colin Sexton and Herb Jones and Brandon Miller and these guys who are first round lottery picks. And Alabama basketball has come a long way, but the season is underway. They've suffered a couple of losses, but for the most part, this looks like a contender that Nate Oats has in 2024, 2025.
Yeah, and I think last year, one of the big ways that it may have impacted the fan base was how the story played out, right? Over the course of the regular season into that postseason run, because Alabama wasn't a perfect team all season last year. They didn't always look like the dominant team that ended up going on that Final Four run in the actual tournament. They had to figure some things out along the way, and they did. And I think that example for fans to be able to see that is really helpful and kind of a great example for the fan base and a good moment in building a culture around basketball at Alabama to show these fans like, look, are they gonna maybe they drop one in the non-conference slate to Oregon, right? Maybe they end up at some point during this what is likely to be a pretty hectic SEC season. Maybe they lose to one of the dozen teams or so that is pretty highly ranked and seems to be very talented and competitive in this conference. It's not something to abandon hope over, and it's not something to get frustrated about and stop caring about this team, because we've now seen Nate Oats has the ability to turn those losses into learning experiences. And really what you want is for the team to figure it out and peak in March. And that, look, they were able to do it a year ago. They're that to me, and I don't know how you feel about this, Ben. You've watched a lot more of this basketball team this year than me. I think they overall look a little bit ahead of schedule from last year. They're certainly not a perfect team yet, but they don't seem to be as inconsistent. They don't seem to be struggling in some of the same areas this season as they were maybe at this point a year ago.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, they're winning games this year that they did lose last year. I mean, Alabama has a couple of tough losses. They lost at Purdue by less than 10 points. They lost against Oregon during a final of a non-conference tournament after they had beaten top 10 Houston, after they had beaten Rutgers in a scrappy game. But they've got an unbelievable resume at this point in the season, and they've got so many victories against ranked opponents like Illinois. I mentioned Houston. They beat North Carolina. They just beat undefeated Oklahoma, smacked undefeated Oklahoma in Coleman Coliseum, and they just went on the road and beat a top 10 Texas A&M team. They're about to play Ole Miss here pretty soon, and Alabama is just, I think, the word, especially during the Nate Oats era, and including why they went on the run that they did last year, is that Alabama's battle tested and that their schedule is difficult, and that helps them long term. The fact that they play good teams all year, that they play close games, even if they lose them, that they get big wins. And by the end of the season, they know that they've been up against the best in the country and they're willing to go toe to toe. And that's why they were able to get wins against teams like North Carolina in the tournament last year, Clemson to reach the Final Four, to give UConn somewhat of a game, at least for a half and a half in the Final Four game last year, and they would obviously be the eventual champions. So, last year they had lost Brandon Miller. Mark Sears stepped up and really emerged as one of the best players in the country unexpectedly. And during that Final Four run, he just looked amazing. But Nate Oats convinces him to come back. And Alabama has created a roster this year that was built for a big run in the postseason, certainly during March Madness. But, man, I mean, if you just look at this roster, that's the difference, the depth that Alabama has on this roster. I mentioned Mark Sears, but when you have guys like Grant Nelson come back, who had a really strong March in tournament last year, when you have a top-rated recruit like Darian Reed come in, you have a transfer like Aiden Holloway, former Auburn player who's proven to be a reliable shooter and scorer. But to me, Matt, Clifford Omuri from Rutgers, who's a really good big man. But for me, Matt, the star of the season so far, other than Sears, who's averaging nearly 20 points a game, is LeBaron Philon. LeBaron Philon is a stud.
Yep.
Like, I mean, I love watching this guy play basketball. He's a guy where he has such an instinct and feel for the game, and he does things that you just don't see college players do. His basketball IQ is so high. His instinct is so unbelievable. His finishing ability is great. He's improving as an outside shooter, just an impeccable ball handler, and just a guy who is going to help Alabama make a deep run, hopefully in March. But yeah, they're a fun team to watch, and a big reason is LeBaron Philon. This guy's appointment television if you're in Alabama or just a college basketball fan.
And an interesting moment the other night, Ben, in that Texas A&M game with Philon, there was a sequence that got a little bit of talk actually on the internet, and primarily, I will say, from Auburn fans who take a great interest in Alabama basketball, why wouldn't you? But there was a clip, right, where essentially a defensive lapse by Philon, and Nate Oats calls a timeout, runs out into the middle of the court, and gets on Phylon for essentially not getting back on defense. And he was very fiery about it in a way that you don't typically see him towards an individual player. I think what you're seeing at this point in the season is that Oates not only realizes that he has a lot of great talent on this team, but when you see somebody coaching that way, I think, in particularly in Oates' case, I think he knows that he's even got more that this team can give. I think he knows they have not hit their potential yet, and seeing him in a game that they are winning, and at that point, I believe they were already up by a decent margin. This was before they kind of gave back some of that late in the game. He sees that we could actually go on another very deep run. And for me to get there, I have to not just be happy about the things we're doing right. I have to make sure these guys know that they can even do better than they're doing right now. They can play well on both sides of the ball, but they have to be focused and they have to play a full game. And I think you're typically going to see that from younger guys. That's the kind of thing you see from a freshman player is maybe occasionally having a great game on offense, maybe not getting back on defense the way that you should. But Oates, to me, watching him coach this team, I can sense that he thinks they've got more to give than they're giving right now, even as good as the season has been so far.
It's about sustaining a certain level of intensity, right? Playing winning basketball. That's what Oates constantly wants them to do. If he senses defensive lapses, he gets very upset, and as he should, right? Like he's a real deal basketball coach, and it's just been really fun to watch, especially him as a fish out of water coming from the Northeast and just changing the culture of basketball here. And Alabama's lucky to have him at this point. I think after that Final Four run, there were a lot of people who thought, man, he'd be a Kentucky candidate. Man, he's going to be an NBA candidate. And he may be at some point, right? Like maybe there is a job that Nate Oats wants beyond Tuscaloosa. He's repeated many times, though, that like this is where he wants to be. He considers this a destination. We'll see. But he's obvious, even if Nate Oats were to leave, and I don't mean to like bring that up at this point, but like he's given Alabama things. He's helped them reach heights they've never reached before. So he's done a tremendous job. It's undeniable. And I mean, you look at the schedule, Matt, I think he also knows that they're about to go through a gauntlet, right? Like they're about to play ranked Ole Miss, ranked Kentucky, top 10 Kentucky team, ranked Mississippi State, ranked Georgia, and obviously the number one team in the country on Saturday, February 15th in Tuscaloosa, not to mention Tennessee and Florida. These are top 10 teams, and then having to play potentially the number one team again. Maybe Alabama will be number one at that point. Who knows? But you're talking about a possible number one versus number two in Coleman Coliseum, which when was the last time that happened, if ever, Matt?
I can't imagine it's happened before, but it's cool that this program is going to be in the spotlight the way they are this season. And it helps to continue to build the culture around the program. But Ben, I this is not going to be a popular thing to bring up, but I really think, to some degree, Alabama fans kind of owe a little bit of a debt of gratitude to Bruce Pearl for creating this level of excitement and investment in the program. Right. I mean, I think even when Alabama was the better, obviously better basketball program in the state, there just wasn't a lot of incentive to pour resources into it to get better. And I think getting a little bit of a kick in the pants from Auburn and watching them transform that program with enthusiasm, I think it lit a little bit of a fire under Alabama. And what you've seen is Alabama has responded by saying, hey, look, if we want to care about a program, we can do it better than you can. And they did it pretty quickly. I mean, once Oates got in here, the speed with which he turned this program into a national contender is really impressive. And really now what remains to be seen is how consistent can this program be at being that type of program? How consistently are they not just going to the tournament, but coming in as a high seed and going on deep runs and making March a regular part of life for Alabama fans.
I don't think Auburn deserves any credit for that. If I'm being totally honest with you, Matt, I mean, I don't know.
I think it's a little bit like Rocky and Apollo running down the beach together, right? Like you get better because there's somebody you're racing against that you really want to beat.
Yeah, look, that's true. I mean, it's exciting for the SEC. It's exciting for the state of Alabama. It's frustrating, I think, for each of the fan bases, though, right? Because when you're peaking, essentially, that team down the road is doing the exact same thing. And like it obviously ignites the rivalry in ways that you've never seen it before. And listen, for the last few years, that it's been a really exciting rivalry. The atmosphere inside each of those venues has been second to none. That's going to be true this year too. The stakes are going to be higher than ever. And so I can't wait for that February 15th game. The place is going to be it's going to be a live wire. So yeah, and listen, Bruce Pearl's a great coach. He always has been. Wherever he's gone, those teams have been tournament teams. They've done well, and he's turned Auburn into a contender. When I bet most people thought that wasn't even possible. Number 1 ranking, Final Four appearance. Like nobody thought Auburn was going to reach those heights. I don't even think they probably thought that under Bruce Pearl. But he's taken them there. It's hard to believe that he's been there for more than a decade at this point. That's kind of shocking to me. That just means I'm getting older, and so are you, Matt. But it's look, I mean, these two coaches have interesting personalities and they're competitors. That's the thing I like about Nate Oats is that he is a competitor. He cares about a lot of things, I'm sure, but the top thing he cares about is basketball. And he obsesses over it.
I don't want to get too deep into like wrestling terminology, Ben, for our listeners, but like basically I think Nate Oats plays up things like rivalries and direct competition with other teams and other programs. And he loves to be the sort of mild-mannered guy at press conferences and sort of catch you unawares, but he'll every once in a while he'll throw some little line out there and you're like, is that about who I think it's about? And I think he knows what he's doing.
He'll say it directly sometimes.
Yeah.
Like these are two coaches too, who's like feet belong in their mouths, to say the least. Sometimes, it's like sometimes to be in a press conference, be like, like, I mean, their bench just isn't even that good, to be honest with you,
Yes.
And it's just like, but coach, like.
But that to me, Ben, that's the fun kind of foot in the mouth for like. I think coaches should have a little bit of fun with that stuff. Like there's no reason to like be personally insulting to anybody, and I don't think he is. But like, riling people up a little bit, acting like you care whether you beat the other guy or not. I think that's fun, and I think Bruce Pearl does some of that too, and ultimately like it's. I don't think much of it is mean-spirited. I think that these are guys who like competing with each other, and it's sort of good-natured trash talk to in a very subtle way, I think.
I mean, when he's standing there shaking hands with an invisible coach a couple of years ago, remember when Kelvin Sampson had his hissy fit? That's kind of like double-edged sword, where it's just kind of like, okay, like I get, like it's kind of fun, right? But at the same time, it's just like, you're a head coach, man. Like, leave that to the trolls on social media.
Stirring it up a little bit.
Yeah. I left out the shoot. He always says, shoot, shoot. You can't help it.
This is my first time finding out that you have a Nate Oats impression. And honestly, I don't think I've heard anybody else do one. I think you're the only guy.
There are plenty of them out there. I'm sure there are plenty of them out there. Lot to look forward to this season. Like, and we're going to talk a lot about it with some special guests, I think, Matt, to talk Alabama basketball. So I'm really excited about that. And look, man, I go to every home game in Tuscaloosa that I can, and so I can't wait to check it out. And Alabama basketball on the rise, risen, I guess. I mean, they're up there, and they have been now for several years under Oats. So exciting times, and we know they're going to be around in March, and we'll be there too. He's Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. Matt, thanks for doing this again.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Find Beat Everyone on YouTube or anywhere else you get your podcasts, and Thanks to producers Matt Scalici and John Hammondtree. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We'll see you next time.